7 things Americans have more of than British people. Interesting. I'm interested to know what you've got more of. Am I going to be jealous? Probably. I'm going to be jealous. Make sure you guys like and subscribe this video. Make sure you like and subscribe to this video and other videos if you like to. Early access will be on Patreon. If you can help us out there, we really appreciate it. But don't worry if you can't. Just watching this video will be enough. So let's get into it. What am I going to be jealous of today?
I don't think that they're going to be happy about that.
It's Losty. His links are in the description.
I'm Lawrence, and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond. And one of those memos pertains to the things we own, whether that's money, a house,
American
your
fridges.
soul. We all have things in our possession that make us who we are. But after living in the United States for 16 years, I've come to find that Americans are more likely to own certain things than British people are. Same is true in reverse, but that's not what this video is about. Now, if you own a free subscription to this YouTube channel, thanks. If not, do that now. Sorry for scaring the cat.
Subscribe here.
In the meantime, here are 7 things that Americans are more likely to own than British people.
A car, wow.
And the first thing that we're going to talk about is cars. And you might be thinking, Lawrence, that's not surprising. You always talk about how America has a really large car culture. And this is true, but I think that ignores the fact that when I lived in Britain, I was far more likely to experience a traffic jam. Why is that, Lawrence? Well, because we have way more people in a smaller area. And so even though there are fewer cars per person, there are still millions of cars. So that probably cemented in my head a false impression of just how many cars we have in England compared to here. But there's no arguing with facts, even though some of you try. In the US, about 91% of households own at least one car, while in the UK, it's closer to 77%. Of course, Americans don't just stop at one car. They're often juggling 2, 3, maybe 4.
I feel like Americans have multiple cars. Obviously not all Americans, but I feel like a lot of them do, whereas in Britain, most people have like one car, maybe 2 cars, potentially. Because also like the driveways are that small, like we only get one parking space, etc. In our flat, a lot of places are the exact same. So yeah, you guys have got big driveways.
4 vehicles per family, practically enough to start a car dealership. This partly explains why in the state of Montana, each resident averages nearly 2 cars. In Britain, if somebody owns 2 cars, they're either a millionaire or a car thief. In fact, the idea of parking more than one car outside of your average British home sounds like a logistical nightmare. So while Brits are debating whether to pay for an MOT this year, Americans are hopping into their pickup trucks, SUVs, and maybe even a spare sedan.
A dog.
Perhaps one of the more surprising entries on this list is that Americans are more likely than British people to own a dog. Firstly, I can say that anecdotally as somebody who lived in Britain for a long time and didn't own my own dog, but did after I moved to the United States. Therefore, that's proof. It's just not very good proof. But before we look at the facts again, I have more anecdotes. Because initially, after I moved to the US, I lived with my in-laws who had 240 dogs. It was 3 dogs, but I mean, still, 3 dogs feels like a...
Funny because my in-laws have 3 dogs too. It doesn't feel like a million dogs, but yeah, my in-laws have 3 dogs too.
Lot, especially as somebody who raised a puppy last year. And yet it feels like it's not particularly uncommon in America. In Britain, as my wife said to me the other day, we seem to have a concern about leaving dogs alone when we go to work, which is fair enough, but I'm, you know, a YouTube sensation and I work from home. So I don't have that problem.
Lawrence, we really need to work on your relatability.
That said, it is one thing to feel that Americans have more dogs than British people. Once again, here's voiceover Lawrence from the basement to give you the facts. Statistically, around 40% of American households have at least one dog, which means that the other 60% have made a mistake. Compare this to the UK, where the percentage is thought to be between 30 and 36%. So why is there a disparity? Well, maybe it's because dogs require something that we as a nation of British people haven't quite figured out: enthusiasm. Either way, Americans don't just live with dogs, they treat them like royalty. Doggy daycare, pup cups, Halloween costumes. And I was about to say that it all sounds a little bit much, but then I remembered Arthur has enjoyed all 3 of those things. Dogs bring us joy. You're not going to believe this one. When I was doing research for this video, my face turned into thumbnail Lawrence. Because, and I hope you're sitting down for this, Americans are more likely to own a gun than British people. What? Which might sound like sarcasm, but one thing that often doesn't get spoken about when it comes to Britain is we do have guns. It's true. Contrary to popular belief, not all guns are completely banned across the UK. They're just heavily regulated. In order to obtain a rifle or a shotgun, a civilian must obtain applicable licenses and must have a valid reason for owning one. These reasons include sport shooting and hunting, but don't extend to firing off a few rounds at midnight on New Year's Eve. And yes, that last sentence was aimed at Chainsaw Jim. However, as is famously known, this pales in comparison to gun ownership in the United States. In the US, it turns out there are more guns than people. For every 100 Americans, there are about 120 firearms, making it the highest such ratio in the world. For sake of comparison, 100 Brits will statistically have about 5, which is similar to the percentage of Brits that have been thrown out of a pub. Coincidence? I don't know. So Brits often ask me, "Ooh, Lawrence, how many guns do you see every single day?" And the answer to that is next to 0.
This was something that surprised us because we always thought when we go to America we're going to see everybody with guns. You don't see them. Like, you don't see everybody walking around the street with their guns.
You happen to be friends with hunters, members of the police force, or gangs. People aren't just wielding them on the street, they conceal them in their clothes. I don't have x-ray eyes, so I just assume that maybe they're there. There's a surprising lack of visibility around guns. And you might say, Lawrence, that's because you live in Illinois where they have strict open carry laws, but the thing is, I also lived in Indiana where they don't, and it was the same story. I'm really just pointing this out so that my Aunt Mildred stops asking me if I'm alright. Walking down the street, I think I've maybe seen one gun in 16 years wielded on the street. And it was a super soaker. Yes, a lot of American households, I would imagine, do own a Bible. And that's because I think Americans in general, if they are religious, are more likely to wear their religion on their sleeve than we are in Britain, where people, generally speaking, keep that to themselves. I think, as well, it's fair to say that Britain is a more secular culture. We've got a higher percentage of people there that I would say are non-believers or non-practicing religious people. Whereas here, while, you know, America doesn't have churches that are 800 years old, it does have churches on about every corner trying to compete with Starbucks. And so Bibles, as well as crucifixes on walls and maybe a Bible verse or two hanging on the same wall, is just something you see way more of here. You know, even people I've known who aren't like particularly overtly religious have that stuff on their walls because it's just sort of culturally ingrained. Here's a statistic for you. In the US, nearly 88% of households own at least one Bible. And not just that, the average household owns 4, about 1 for each car. Now, I couldn't find any reliable statistics for Britain, but I did find this. Only 6% of Brits actively practice Christianity or regularly read the Bible. So whether it's a sign of devotion or, you know, a cultural habit, the Bible is clearly a key player in American households. And as for Britain, let's just say the Bible's collecting dust next to that unopened copy of Pride and Prejudice.
A gym membership.
Gym memberships. And some of you might be watching this going, isn't America famously kind of overweight and out of shape? And while there are very much elements of that, it's also a country of extremes. We talked about this recently, to the extent that gym culture, just like car culture, just like any other embedded culture within American culture, is a real thing. You could be driving through Chicago just down the street and you look to your right and see people working out through a window. And these are not uncommon. But for me, growing up in Britain, I think the last time I went to a gym was at school. Actually, I think that's still the case. I don't know why that is. I think we're a nation of joggers, so we like to work out that way, and cycling. I think our country has the infrastructure for outdoor exercise more perhaps than the United States does, where also I think you're less likely to find a sort of public swimming bath. Like, they do exist here, but in Britain they're far more common, although the one that I grew up with in my hometown closed down, so I don't know how true that still is. I think it's just we have different ways of staying in shape. Statistically, around 24% of Americans claim to have a gym membership, which sounds impressive until you realise that most of us think that leg day is walking to and from the basement, and cardio means bending down to tie your shoelace. Meanwhile, the British approach fitness with a little more subtlety. About 14% of Brits are signed up for a gym, but it's not because they're less active. After all, lugging around 4 shopping bags of Tesco meal deals has its own charm. Why sweat in lycra when you've got the great outdoors and a pot noodle as your workout incentive?
Sweatpants. I do love sweatpants. I do feel like I live in sweatpants quite a lot.
something that you might wear at a gymnasium. Sweatpants. I remember having a pair of sweatpants when I was a child. I don't remember owning a single pair since then. In Britain, it could be that we're less likely to embrace casual fashion.
I feel like
although
a lot
I do
of people
remember
do
shell
wear
suits.
sweatpants.
Here, sweatpants aren't just the fashion choice of the gymnasium goers. I sometimes see people walking down this street in them, or going to the shops, or sitting in a restaurant. And frankly, they just look a little bit silly.
In them.
Although I've just remembered I was wearing a raccoon suit earlier. So what do we think, voiceover Lawrence? Are your observations of sweatpants accurate? Americans are nearly twice as likely to own a pair of sweatpants compared to their British counterparts. Twice! And that's not just some stat I've made up. That's a stat that ChatGPT just made up, but it sounds right. Meanwhile, across the pond, Britons seem to reserve their sweatpants for painting the house. It's less Netflix and chill, and more DIY and dress sweatpant year-round, thanks to air-conditioned bliss. Whereas Brits don't do that. So is this a love story between Americans and their joggers, or just a cultural misunderstanding about what's truly formal wear for a Target run? Either way, the numbers don't lie, even made-up ones. Sweatpants are basically America's second uniform. Not to finish talking about toilets, but we're going to finish talking about toilets. Because in the vast majority of the more than 10 American addresses that I've lived at, there has been a second toilet. Am I complaining? No, because then you get one to yourself when you live with only one other person. Mine's the basement one. But in Britain, a second toilet within a house, I think would be considered a luxury. And maybe that's down to the fact that our houses are smaller.
So that's interesting, because growing up, my houses, both of the houses that I lived in, were not luxury. We had an upstairs toilet and a downstairs toilet. That's 2 toilets. Interesting.
We don't have White Castle, but I think every address that I lived at in Britain had just the one, which is really bad when it gets blocked and you live with 5 people. According to a recent survey, 65% of US homes have 2 bathrooms, compared to just 27% in the UK. Now, that's not just convenience, it's a logistical dream. Imagine never having to queue up at 7 a.m, dodging flatmates in fluffy robes while clutching a toothbrush like a weapon of war. So why is there a disparity? Well, it boils down to that thing again, space. The average American home is over twice the size of the average British one, meaning there's plenty of room to fit that extra throne. Although in Britain, we do have actual thrones. Anyway, that was it.
That was good. A lot of you guys, you guys have a lot of things that we don't necessarily have a lot of. Let us know in the comments below if you agree with this list, or if you think it should be the other way, or whatever. Let us know in the comments and below. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know any other Lost in the Pond videos you want us to react to. You know we love reacting to them. And have a fantastic day, guys.